And we're live. Welcome to another episode of Professor and the Idiot. I'm Nick Wolfinger.
I'm Amy Newberg. I'm the idiot most of the time. Maybe today I'm not. Maybe today you're the idiot, Nick, because we're
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, because we're talking to a dancer, and Nick has admitted that he knows, quote, fuck all about dance.
Yes.
So now is his chance to find out fuck all.
Yes. And I expect in the course of the next 500 to 600 episodes, we can shed substantial light on who the idiot is and what entails.
Right.
Okay.
Although I'm definitely not the professor, so just sort of by process of elimination, I'll tend to be the idiot.
Okay.
All right. Anyway, not to mention today's guest, who is my friend Claudine Naganuma. I've known Claudine for, oh my gosh, decades. I may have known Claudine from way back in the days when we were both at Mills, because I've been associated both with the new music world and the dance world, and Claudine is also associated with both those things. And over the years, I have watched her put together her dance company, dNaga Dance, and I've worked with her as a composer and really admired the work that she has done. She works with young women and also with people with Parkinson's disease, which turns out to be kind of an amazing process that has led her in some interesting directions. So we're going to talk about all that, and welcome, Claudine.
Hi, thanks for having me, you guys.
Sure.
We're happy to have you.
Lovely.
So what's it like right now to be a dancer during this COVID time when dance is such a physical togethery kind of thing and you can't do that?
Yeah, it takes a lot of discipline to keep going because you have to carve out your own time and your own space to keep practicing your craft, which is, it's kind of sucky that we're all isolated in this way, but thankfully, we have technology to let us Zoom classes together, so we're all collectively clasping hold of the countertops and the bathroom door jambs and trying to take class together still. So one of the things that it did open up actually is that I get a chance to take class with people all over the country and the world, which is kind of an unusual thing. So we're just trying to make do, but we are waiting for the moment where we can breathe and sweat together, and hopefully that will happen soon.
Is dNaga, how is your dance company staying cohesive at this time?
Well, so dNaga doesn't just have a performing company. We also run community programs. So I am still teaching dance for Parkinson's classes every Thursday. And I'm also offering activities for middle school and high school aged youth in East Oakland. And I still run Dance Space, which is a little dance studio in the Rockridge area. And it, the Nutcracker must persist. So we are working a virtual version this year.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Can we go back to your humble beginnings and find out about how you ended up becoming a dancer? What was your path to becoming a dancer, and specifically a choreographer? How, it seems to me that sort of like in the music world, there are musicians who just really like to play other people's music, and then those who go, wait, I want to create this stuff, and they become composers. And it seems like the dance world is sort of analogous. Some dancers become choreographers. So what was your path to that?
So very young, I actually started off with learning classical Chinese dance and acrobatics, and took piano lessons when I was really little, and pretty much grew up performing Chinese classical and folk dance in San Francisco, Chinatown. So I grew up in San Francisco, but oddly enough, I also went to a bilingual Spanish elementary school. So at that time, they were busing kids around So I kind of had an eclectic upbringing and actually grew up as a nanny person for a Jewish family, which is where I became a camp counselor. So I had a lot of different exposure to different cultures growing up. And for dance too, I studied jazz, and then I studied modern and ballet and Butoh. I had some Gong Fu in there. And so I think that what led me more towards becoming a choreographer was that I had all these paints to mix, and I needed to kind of fuse some of these styles together. And so I think that's why I started creating movement vocabulary and creating dances. But I still really kind of adhere to the notion of, practicing technique. So even though I primarily focus on ballet as a way to keep my technique going, you can't always see it necessarily in my work because I use it as just more of a technique, way to practice technique. But yeah, that
Wow.
started moving.
Okay, you just gave me like a little eureka moment. Like, I often wonder what causes one artist to kind of follow the rules in a traditional way and another to get wacko and become more of a creative person. And it never really occurred to me that one of the reasons that I became a composer is because my story is similar in that I had a lot of exposure to different kinds of music, dance, different kinds of arts, a whole sort of onslaught of, everything from classical to pop. And I guess when I was studying opera, I went, wait, why is this just like this and doesn't incorporate some of these other things that are so fun? And then I just decided, well, I'm going to incorporate them and do them my own way. So, wow.
Which you do so awesomely.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I always knew that I was doing this mix of things, but it didn't really occur to me that it was that mix of things that compelled me to be an avant-garde person.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay. Anyway, blah, 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 blah.
Well,
So-
as the social scientist, you just made a causal argument, right? It's about a mix of things. It's influences growing up that compelled you to do the art you do. And my thought is maybe it's a more iterative process, right? You're pointed in the direction by your influences, but that also leads you to try a bunch of different things. Does it make you did it lead you, both of you, especially to the forms of art you took up, or just to experiment with different forms?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Was that a question?
No, I understand. I mean, what comes first, the open-mindedness or the onslaught of cultures? Yeah.
And, I would add influences on human behavior are vast. There are family, there are friends, there are genes, there are so many different things.
I would probably say that the environment probably comes first, because an artist needs to be nurtured and feel safe to take risks. If we're living in a situation where we're dealing with survival, it is very challenging, I think. Well, I mean, the other argument then is that, if you are living in survival, then you must become an innovative thinker, right?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. I just argued with myself.
Yeah, no, interesting question. I mean,
did.
This gets into the whole question of whether being an artist is some kind of privilege, that we can do it because we feel safe doing it, because we had a safe environment.
Yeah. And you had food.
And we had food, yeah.
Although the point about the privilege, made me think of an experience I had at the beginning of grad school at UCLA in 1990, where I did some field work in downtown LA, where there are a lot of homeless folks. And one of the things I picked up is they have to master so many skills and know about so many bureaucracies and operate under so many constraints. There's a ton of innovation, and and people are innovating and adapting, and in ways that I wouldn't have thought of before I saw it. So my point is that I guess by trying to make a broader point is that, you innovate with what you have.
Yeah, I observe, having been in the Bay Area for many kind of waves of wealth and poverty, that the worse things get financially for artists, the more creative they become, because they're looking for new ways to produce. I mean, they're so passionate about getting their work out no matter what, that they'll just create new venues out of nothing, and they'll take, classical musicians will take their stuff into the clubs because the symphonies are drying up, and people will go onto the streets and do things. It's like, I think we become more innovative during these times. What do you think of that, Claudine?
I was going to add one example, a news story several years ago about the paintings that were quite good of a prisoner in solitary confinement at Pelican Bay who did his paintings with the colors on M&Ms.
Oh my gosh.
Oh.
Yeah, and it was good, right? So he was an artist, and so he worked with what he had.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, and if you go to downtown Oakland, there's like fantastic street art going on right now in response to a lot of the businesses being boarded up and Black Lives Matter.
Right.
yeah. It just reminds me a little bit about using one's experiences, and the more poignant those experiences are, the more possibility. So like if they are traumatic experiences, somehow using art to transform those experiences and share them to make the world a better place so that people have a better understanding of those traumas. I think that's another place that artists can pull from.
Yeah. And that's another big question about how we do that well, and how we do it in a way that has the right balance of personal and universal, so that it's not just, oh, poor me, I'm expressing myself, but it's something that everybody can relate to.
Yeah.
Yeah, Amy, as you and I have discussed, the internet means there is a surfeit of people expressing themselves at this moment.
Right. Well, let's get back to what you're doing, Claudine. So you have this dance company,
Mhm.
and how did that come about? And especially, you have an interesting approach that I've never seen before. You incorporate quite young kids into your dance company, and they seem to have sort of the skill and discipline to do what it takes to show up and rehearse and perform, and they seem quite mature for kids at such a young age. So how does all that work, and how did that start?
What ages are we talking about?
Well, I think maybe the youngest I took in was 7 who performed.
Okay.
She just graduated from college.
Wow.
I know. But well, I'm really lucky to be at Dance Space, where I have been able to meet a lot of kids that came through the school. So there's usually kids who are just, naturally musical, creative, have, really fantastic imaginations. And it was like they've done it before. They fit right in to, they're natural hams. And they're usually the ones where adults feel like they can't control their kid because the kid is just so creative and can self-direct. And I really love to foster that energy in little ones. I kind of grew up in a more strict household where it was like, I don't want to say how old I am, but but in the old days, kids were to be seen and not heard. You really just like mouth off. So in some cultures, that's still the case, right? So I think it's a little bit different now, because I think parents parent differently now and engage their children in decision making, which is how do you find the right balance? But what I started to realize was that I wanted kids to be front and center, and very often made them the decision maker. So we would do, for example, an improvisatory movement. The kid would be downstage because they're shorter. And then we would take we would say, let's do it until the youngest, shortest human on stage says it's time. And then we move into the next section. And I just love that. I just love that everybody is being led by the child. And it's metaphor for, of course, you know, when they are going to lead, they are going to be leading. So they might as well start practicing now.
Do all the girls eventually become dancers? I mean, do they generally keep dancing after they've worked with your company?
The batch of kids that I had 7, 9, 11, yeah, they're still dancing. They are, which is amazing. And then
Is it only girls?
Mostly girls, yeah, who came in the ballet school, and then danced with me, study, you know, I try to provide these workshops where they can practice like flying, aerial dance, or Buto dance, and we do collaging and all of these different things. And then many of them have actually gone on to dance or have gone into the medical field, because a lot of them have grown up, you know, dancing with people with Parkinson's. That's kind of exciting to see.
Yeah.
One
Wow.
towards neurology, and one moves towards occupational therapy, and another became a doctor as well. Yeah. Kind of.
That's better than my first thought was, oh God, they're getting hurt, and that's why they're going into the medical field. Come on, I say this as someone with much experience of athletic injuries. Go on.
How did you begin to incorporate dance for Parkinson's?
So the Mark Morse Dance Group was coming out here consistently to Cal Performances to do a season, whether it was like a repertory season or a nutcracker, a hard nut. And they came out here almost every year. And I had done a little stint for several years, have had a love affair with New York, and so had taken several intensives with the Mark Morse Dance Group. And every time they would come back, I would ask teachers to teach at Dance Space, to either offer master classes in ballet, modern, partnering. And the program director, David Leventhal, who is an amazing angel bodhisattva, is one of the founding teachers of Dance for Parkinson's. And he kept asking if he could teach it at Dance Space. Well, I denied his request for a couple of years until our friend Herb Hines had come out and told me about his diagnosis, in which case we started partnering together to offer these classes. And then eventually the 501c3 PD Active was created, Herb and a group of other core members. And then we've been offering Dance for PD classes since 2007.
PD being Parkinson's disease.
Yeah.
What's great about Dance for Parkinson's? I mean, what did you observe in it that made you interested in taking it on more seriously?
Well, first of all, the students were really lovely. So, and most are a little older. So, you know, what a delight combining the kids with the elders. So one kid actually said, I want to get in your company. Do I need to bring my own grandma? I said, sure, bring your grandma. So that intergenerational component is great. But with the Dancers with Parkinson's, so it's a neurological disorder. There's no cure for it yet. And it's idiopathic. We don't know exactly how it started, although there's more clues. And it's a movement disorder. So it manifests in rigidity and sometimes, but not always, with the tremor. And we found that the tools that dancers use to execute and remember movement work for people with Parkinson's. So musicality, using music to move through something, or using imagery to move through something. So for example, if we begin and say, please turn to your right, there might be some festination and not able to turn. But if you're able to engage in some musicality and say, follow the butterfly across the moon, it's so whooping around, all of a sudden you see everybody turning.
What's festination?
Festination is like when you're trying to step forward, but then you're kind of stuck and there's sort of like this jostling back and forth. So very often you can use a line or a laser or kick a bag, some kind of external cue to move your foot, but the internal cues aren't working.
Okay.
So for dancers, we are very often trying to coerce our muscles to do things that we don't necessarily want to do at a certain time in the music, or a certain movement within a given time. And so we can use those rhythms and images, I think, both externally as well as internally. We can create those cues.
It's interesting. I've been a musician for decades, and I still don't understand what this is, but I can be in a terrible mood. I have to clean my house, and I'm just like, oh my God, I can't even stand up. I have to clean my house. I put on some music, and suddenly I'm zipping around the house cleaning my house.
Yeah.
Which seems to me that's very similar to what happens to the people with Parkinson's. It plays on some kind of energy system that enables them to do things they couldn't do a moment before. Does anyone understand what's going on there?
I think Oliver Sacks does. He has a book called Musicophilia.
Right.
Yep.
Which I've read. Yeah, so I should be able to answer my own question. Yeah, but it's pretty amazing. I mean, I've actually seen this in action. It's dramatic. You know, I mean, Parkinson's is sort of the quintessential I can't move disease, and then music comes on and they're inspired by both the music and the other people around them moving, and suddenly there they are moving.
Yeah, that's the cool thing,
Yeah.
right? So having a debilitating disease might make one want to become isolated out of shame, but dance is like all about ensemble. So that's another cool thing about dance that combats Parkinson's.
Yeah, that's a good point. So in general, do you think your work has a social message?
It's interesting because I think, as an artist, I'm always working out my own issues through the creation of art. And for me, a lot of my issues are around identity. So like I said, I grew up in San Francisco. My mom is Chinese. She was born in Hong Kong. And she actually went through the Angel Island immigration station as a result of the Asian Exclusion Act, the Chinese Exclusion Act, sorry. And then my dad is Japanese, and my grandmother was born in Hawaii. My grandpa was in Japan, and my dad was born in San Francisco. And he and that side of the family was interned at the Gila River Reservation during World War II. So it's interesting because I think that, we didn't talk much about it growing up, but I feel like it really has impacted my identity and feeling safe, and also not seeing a reflection of my experience in mainstream media. Or, when I first started in the dance world, I was lucky enough to direct Asian American dance performances. And a lot of my work was curating other choreographers, creating work. And that was the Asian American diaspora, right? Filipino, Thai, Hmong, Chinese, fourth through first generation, Filipino, then you have traditional, and then you have contemporary work. And so identity, I'm not exactly sure how I got there, except that I think that I'm always working out my own issues. So in terms of political and cultural work, it's important that the people that I work with, like the dancers with Parkinson's, feel empowered, that they don't have to hide away just because they don't see their reflection. Same thing with the children. Same thing with the girls that I work with in East Oakland. In many ways, because of the systems of oppression in the United States, I think that many of us, so there we'll say something like supremacy or like white supremacy, right? Then the other half of that system is a whole group of people who feel we're unworthy, right? So we take on just as much the inferiority complex. So you have a superiority and an inferiority. So you have this is what makes up the system. So a lot of my work is self-care as political resistance. I mean, being able to have one's story and spectrum of stories be revealed is kind of the first step of having humans be able to see each other as humans, is to know, oh, these are our relationships to our family, just like I have a relationship to my family. These are my concerns raising my child or taking care of my mom. These are universal things that bring us all together. So in that way, I feel like community work, community activism is for me, about human rights.
You said something interesting about supremacy that got me thinking, if there is now so much attention to this term white supremacy or white privilege, it almost, like, on the one hand, okay, now we're super aware about white privilege, and on the other hand, it almost makes everybody else, it assigns lack of privilege to everybody else, with the danger of dividing us further.
But
does that make sense, what I'm saying?
It does. However, it's always been that way. It's just nobody's ever really noticed.
Well, I would argue there's times it's been more and less salient in America. I mean, now is a moment of high salience, but so too was 1964 and 1965.
Yeah.
Right. But it never went away. And
No,
that's
true.
Color are dealing with it all the time. So it's just, yeah.
Do you think we're moving in a positive direction?
Oh, it seems very, very scary right now. I think I have hope, but it seems like there might be some dark days ahead. But I do feel like in the end, that's why that self-care thing is so important for each person, is we can't combat hate with hate. We can't, it's like we have to stay to that kindness, compassion, and empathy and understanding in order to get through.
Yeah. And then I had another question about the whole sort of Asian American experience and all the different nationalities that encompasses. Does that feel right to you, that all of those things? I mean, it's great that you can be Thai, Pacific Island, Japanese, Chinese, Hmong, etc., and find a place that gives you freedom of expression. So I think ultimately that's the most important thing. But then I wondered, within that, do people feel like, well, we're not all the same? What's this about?
No, it's totally true. Do you know about the Cultural Data Project? So Cultural Data Project is basically asking a lot of nonprofit organizations to catalog their demographics so that they can be able to make these reports about who's being served. Right. So a lot of times you'll ask, there are questions, not just the California Data Project. I don't want to just be down on them because I think it's really a collection of data, right? But all of these miscellaneous labels do become very cumbersome, and it's just the categorization. And I think that that's just the way the human mind is, assimilation and accommodation. Where does this information fit? But I don't think it's enough. I think that it's just like Native American, and you have all these different tribes, right? I think that people should have and do have cultural practices that need to be honored, and everyone, not everyone should be homogenized, but I don't think it has to be so complex as everybody, like funding being dependent upon. It's too bad that the demographics are required in the way that it is. I think this is the first year the Arts Council ended up saying that it wasn't required.
Because there was too much preference for minorities going on?
No, I mean, I think they realized how tedious it was for the nonprofit organizations, especially a small nonprofit organization. There's a lot of bookkeeping. I think the nonprofit system is flawed. The nonprofit corporation system is flawed. That's why dNaga, actually, I have a hybrid organization. So I work with the school. So that's the other thing, is just like building different relationships and partnerships with community organizations. So like a PD Active, like I mentioned earlier, Dance Space is a corporation school. I work with Dancers Group, which is my fiscal sponsor. I do think that money should go towards stories that haven't been heard, which are mostly folks of color who have been oppressed. And, I sat on this panel once for the San Francisco Arts Commission, and I was like, I understand that that it might be challenging to think about it, but if there was an actual law in the United States against a group of people, you can bet that their story has not been told.
Mm-hmm.
So in a cultural equity type of grant situation, it really should go to folks who want to tell those cultural stories.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's interesting. The music world, we look at this too,
Yeah.
It always appears to me like there's preference in the granting world for someone who hasn't had their story told, who comes at it from an interesting cultural perspective, whether it's, LGBT stories or people of color. And you can look at that very cynically and think, well, what if we just closed our eyes and gave the money to the people who had the most talent? But on the other hand, that's not what creates an interesting world. And I believe fully in giving everybody the opportunity to tell their stories. And so I don't have any trouble with this myself, even though it might affect me personally. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I also think that it's still not equitable. We live in a bubble in the Bay Area. So it seems like maybe, that's the way things are going. But if you think about it, ballet started in 1581. There are still primarily white male heads of ballet companies, right? So if we look at the choreographer lists, when did Ailey and when did Pearl Primus come, and when did Black dance in America come? When will Asian American dance come? Where are the Asian Americans, people who are actually born in the United States? That work is really different from if you grew up in a majority culture and you are creating work, right? Which kind of
Do you mean majority culture meaning white American dancers, or do you mean Asian dancers in Asia?
Majority culture here in the United States. So
yeah, no, good point. Many things that seem like they've been, quote, dealt with. It's interesting. We had a similar conversation with Amanda Chaudhry recently about female acceptance in the tech world, mm-hmm. and transgender acceptance. And I always forget that the Bay Area is such an unusual place. In the electronic music world, it as a woman in the 80s going to grad school, I was one of several women in the department, and every time I went to a conference, it was like 100 guys and me, and
yeah.
And that has changed so much over the years that I barely think about it anymore.
Well, so now there's 3 women instead of 1.
Well, I mean, my perception, I help book the San Francisco Electronic Music Festival,
Yeah.
and there's so many fabulous women to choose from. We're not even bending over backwards to try to include women. We're just like picking the people who are good, and many of them are women, and many of them are people of color.
Yeah.
And I love being able to do that. Just like, look at all this talent that we have coming from all different directions.
And Joel and I went to Super Booth maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and really there are not very many women.
Yeah. Well,
What's Super Booth?
it's a synthesizer.
oh, it's like a conference
Thank you.
or something. Yeah. Yeah, and that's true when you go to a lot of the conferences like NAMM. It sure is kind of a sausage fest.
What's NAMM?
National Association of
Mummies? Muslims?
music manufacturers, I think. Gear, it's like gearheads.
I would love to see more women handling controllers and doing more.
Yeah. All right, I'm trying. But there are countries in this world where girls can't even go to school, let alone study an instrument or make music or put their hands on a piece of electronic equipment. I mean, we have so far to go in so many ways, and I constantly have to remind myself that. Anyway,
I know.
So right now, what's your focus?
Oh, the Nutcracker. I'm actually choreographing with little boxes in my head now. So one is in the middle. There's like 6 people on each stage left and stage right of the Zoom box. It's kind of a strange situation here. So that's what I'm working on artistically, is I'm choreographing a Waltz of the Flowers. And in terms of my work with Girl Project, we've been doing a lot of cultural activities. So we learned how to make tamales from the area of Veracruz with banana leaves, and salsa and tortillas. And then we did a 6-week session on doing an altar for Day of the Dead. And then we're moving into art classes, charcoal drawing. So we've been doing a lot more art classes online.
Oh, that sounds great. And who are you working with on those?
So I've been working on it with Girl Project moms and grandmothers, and then also with a muralist named Xochitl Guerrero, who taught the altar making session. And then we're working with Tarika Lewis, who is teaching charcoal drawing and watercolor. And she was one of the original women in the Black Panther Party. And now she's a musician and she's a teacher. So what we try to do is we bring in mentors who will be around to just basically answer questions to young kiddos and develop relationships.
Who are the kiddos?
So Girl Project has been happening now. We're closing out our 7th year. And there are kids who primarily live in the San Antonio district of Oakland. When we are not in shelter in place, we run our program at Eastside Cultural Center, which is on International and 23rd Avenue. And it is in many ways similar to the Dance for Parkinson's program in that it offers art and empowerment activities.
Specifically for girls?
Yeah, specifically for girls of color who live in San Antonio. And so we always offer self-defense, and we offer bike riding, bike safety. And then we figure out ways to distribute bikes and lots of food. We try to provide food and dance classes and visual arts.
I've been on and off paying attention to the activities of Girls Incorporated, which seems like another great organization doing things like that and sort of empowering young girls. And then I get thinking about the boys.
And we're live again.
Okay, so let's see how to segue from what we were doing.
We must confess to our listener base that mistakes were made, there was technological failure, and we had to re-record a section of this podcast.
Oh, okay. Well, we had just been talking about the work that Claudine is. Welcome back, Claudine.
Thanks.
Been talking about the work that Claudine is doing with girls, especially in the San Antonio neighborhood of Oakland. What is it specifically about that neighborhood?
So I came to Eastside Cultural Center first to kind of just do work. So I did a piece in 2012 called Freedom House, and it was a collection of interviews of educators and just talking about what some of the issues are for working with urban youth. As one of the interviewees said, which is code.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I got really inspired by working with Eastside, and I started to offer dance workshops there. And it became really evident that the girls that I was serving were not feeling very safe.
Mm.
So I would ask them, well, what kind of lessons would you like? What is of interest to you? And they said that they really didn't feel safe at home because of home invasion. They didn't feel safe
Oh, gosh.
going from school to home on the streets, that they always had to watch their backs. And at that time, we started a little dance workshop, and we started working with a community garden across the street to just create safe spaces for girls. And one of the things they asked for was self-defense. So we offered self-defense and urban planning and dance classes and art classes. But one question that actually came up during a lesson was, we basically said, is there anything you want to know about self-defense? And one question was, well, what do I do if I get thrown in a trunk? So at that point, it was like, let's go outside and look at a trunk, right? And let's, this is how you bang out the light, and this is how you do this, or you look for things. And there's in newer cars, there's actually it's required to have a button from the inside that you can open up the trunk. So these, this is the reality of some environments, and so we want to be smart about it, and we want to give our kids an opportunity to not only deal with survival, but to thrive. So we really work hard to bring mentors of color to the space and as their teachers, so that they can, over time, we're here as mentors and willing to be aunties to these kids as they grow. And now we just completed our 7th year. We're moving. Next year is actually dNaga's 20th anniversary. And
Yay.
Congratulations.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, and our 8th year with Girl Project.
And the question I was asking, I have no doubt that what you're doing is welcome and necessary, and the kids probably love it. So thank you for doing that with the girls. And as a girl empowerment seems incredibly important. It seems like almost the most important thing we can do globally is educate young women. But it just got me thinking about the boys, because all this attention is now being paid to girls, and I don't hear equal attention being paid to boys. And I wondered if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think actually it's probably still unequal, that there's more things out there for males, but it's just that it's become normalized that we don't actually really pay attention to it. So when I was growing up, I wasn't even allowed to go into the back room of my dad's golf club, So there were a lot of kind of men only type of organizations and clubs and religious organizations. And so I think that we're living in a patriarchal society.
I guess I'm thinking of the confusion that there must be around what it is to be a boy and what it is to be a man right now. I totally agree with what you're saying. Of course, it's a patriarchal society, and more so in many other places in the world. But there's the talk, and there's the balance that boys have to find now between sort of being macho and being sensitive and trying to figure out their roles in a world where women are kind of claiming their power. And I worry about a lot of boys kind of getting lost in the shuffle.
Yeah, I hear you. I think it's the whole way that we educate young humans, regardless of their gender, the spectrum of emotions, being able to even identify and allow all of our young humans to experience the spectrum of emotions, right? We don't actually teach that in school about how to even manage our own minds. But I agree with you. I think that there needs to be a lot of love and attention to our boys as well. And one of the things that I do recommend is watching that documentary called The Mask We Live In. And a lot of our Oakland schools participated in that documentary about what it is to raise boys. So I think that we need a holistic approach to raising sensitive humans. And also a balance of masculine and feminine ideologies. And I think it would serve us all well.
My mind went sort of backwards just in thinking about the fundamental problems of the educational system in this country. It made me wonder, is teaching emotional skills is school the right place for that?
This is something that the Dalai Lama has been talking a lot about, is not just in this country, but just learning about our emotions. He actually has a really interesting website about emotional intelligence that he's touting, and thinks that all education systems should include this.
Yeah, I'm not sure Claudine is saying this is something that ought to be taught in schools. She's just saying if it's not being taught somewhere else, there are aspects of schooling and organizations that can help out, like Claudine's organization.
Yeah, and hopefully families do this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, then, yeah, it seems like what you need to be doing is working with those families in addition to working with the girls themselves.
Yes. In an ideal world, we would have wraparound services for our youth, for sure. Yeah.
I certainly see the appeal. I mean, I know with all sorts of youth rehabilitation, like chemical dependency, it's seen as fundamental that not only the kids are involved, but also their parents are brought in. So that made me start thinking about what you do, Claudine, and wonder, now, is there a way to bring in parents?
Oh my goodness, there are so many great programs out there that are doing it successfully.
That's great.
Yeah, there are a lot of organizations in the Bay Area. I know of one in Richmond that is providing care for the family as well. And I know that there are some attempts with schools to also offer like clinics in the space. Like, again, the whole notion of wrapping around services to young people so that people's, that Maslow's hierarchy of needs are met by the community. That whole notion of it takes a village. I mean, we're so many of us are such independent thinkers and doing things my way. And it's kind of like an interesting thing to think about how we can work together.
I think that's important given how much of our social ills have been attributed to the fact that we're all bowling alone, in the famous words of Robert Putnam, that there's far fewer community engagement of many different kinds.
I mean, that's a good overall effort to make, is just getting out of our own little looking out for ourselves ideologies and trying to make everything we do have some sort of community meaningfulness. So, again, great you're doing that, Claudine.
Yeah, I think that's awesome.
So, well, if people want to look and see what you are up to, they can go to your website, which is dNaga, dNaga.org. And if they click on the first video link there, they will find a project called Mom and Me. And I got to watch the premiere of this just at the beginning of COVID time. And I was really moved by it. It's sort of a dance theater poetry. I don't know, how would you describe it? It just expresses some really interesting relationships between mothers and daughters, and goes into all kinds of cultural differences. And, it's hard not to think about your relationship with your own mother when you watch it. And so it brought tears to my eyes. So can you tell us about that project?
Yeah. So Mom and Me actually started when, after a dance for PD class, one of the moms asked me to choreograph a duet on her and her daughter. And that was before COVID time. So we actually went into the studio and I worked on 3 separate duets. And having lost my own dad not too long ago, I have really evolved, my relationship with my mother. And so I think that the artwork helped me to dissect my own relationship with my mom and to kind of look and see what are other people's relationships to their mother. In particular, those with Parkinson's disease, those relationships were interesting because I was hearing from the moms that they were resisting giving up their, autonomy and feeling bad for being a burden. I specifically heard moms say, I'm the mom, I'm supposed to be the one taking care of them. And now they have to take care of me. And just that whole transformation of the role.
Which happens to all moms, whether or not they have Parkinson's.
That's right. So that was an interesting exercise for me. Unfortunately, because of COVID, the challenge of being together and then the challenges of technology and trying to create a performance on Zoom was just a little bit too challenging. So for the dancers with Parkinson's, we're going to wait a little bit and hopefully be able to perform those in the future. Hopefully at the World Parkinson's Congress in Barcelona. But what ended up happening was then I just continued to delve into Asian American moms. So I was working in partnership with Banti Saray, a Southeast Asian group of sisters who meet together in Oakland, Chinatown. And I interviewed them about what it was like to be a child of an immigrant mom and the challenges of being in America and kind of having different cultural expectations. And then there's also kind of how to raise kids in this era. And one of the interviews was with Shauna Ray talking about her relationship with her own mom and then what it's like to raise African-American girls, and just kind of that whole notion of meeting each situation differently based on safety and expectations. So Mom and Me has we have one little excerpt video called Navigate, and that is, that celebrates Black moms.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Trying to remember what else we talked about.
Talked a little bit about like dealing with things head on, sort of the mom archetype of, I think you wanted to talk a little bit about the whole notion of tiger mom.
Oh yeah, I was really kind of touched that some stereotypes do tend to come from somewhere, but of course we always overdo it, and that's what stereotypes are. And so I just was impressed that many of the girls had the Asian American girls had relationships with their moms that seemed almost typically Asian. Like they described their moms as not being very physically affectionate or being tiger moms. And it was just so refreshing to hear them talk straightforwardly about that without kind of worrying that they were falling into some kind of stereotype, And I found it fascinating because it gave us a real look into what other cultures are like, a real honest look. And I just wondered if you guys had talked about that at all when you put the thing together.
No, we didn't talk about it because it's interesting, right? Because stereotype is really a very oversimplified notion of an idea. So the whole notion of the tiger mom usually to me is more of a situation where there's usually more money in the family, and they have the luxury of having their child compete and try to make something of themselves, there's some sort of investment in, if your child succeeds, then that means that you succeed. I think for Mom and Me, we really just talked about kind of the cultural lack of warm fuzzies. Not a lot of like, I love you. And it's really interesting because, in some Asian countries, boys are more favorable. And then also the way that each child is referred to in a family is often number one, number two, number three. Number one son, number one daughter, all of that. So yeah, it has an impact on our emotional well-being.
Yeah, your sense of yourself must be kind of bizarre to know that you're number three. Yeah.
Right. And yet it's just like kind of normalized, right? So unless we look at these stories and talk about them and unpack them, we really kind of, we're just, it's like the Matrix, it's like, this is how it is. So I like to do interviews to break stereotypes so that we can really look at things in a more holistic way. And that's just one glimpse, right? Tiger Mom is like one archetype, because there are lots of folks who are neglected. There is no tiger mom. There's an absent mother completely. So,
I think one thing you said rings really true to me. There's a big class element in this where, you have to be, probably most tiger moms are upper middle class.
Yeah, kind of true in other cultures as well.
Yeah, exactly. So if you come from a family of lawyers, then you probably are, you're going to be a lawyer, a doctor. So expectations.
So when you went into the arts, did that sit well with your family, or?
No, not really, and back then, I think that the most famous Asian Americans were all journalists. They were all doing the web, right? Wendy Tokuda. So what kind of job could an Asian American really do, right? What is normal? I think times have changed, but times have not changed. I mean, because a lot of the Girl Project participants, I think that the parents would, they basically want to better their lives. So if the family lives in poverty, then hopefully that child will get a good education and get them out of poverty. The tough life, immigrate, we're in a very, very strange time. So.
Well, there is some good news here. Americans in 2020 view immigration more positively than they have for decades. They've reacted a lot to the Orange Man.
Yeah, just the children in cages just breaks my heart.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And there's a lot of assault that's happening in those relocation centers, they're calling.
Yeah, it's fucking terrible.
I think that, many of us are overwhelmed with the amount there's so much trauma. It's kind of like, where do we put our attention? But again, kind of going back to that emotional intelligence I think maybe it's not just for kiddos, it's like we all kind of have to level up.
Yes. Okay. Well, on this day before the election.
Yes, Dia de los Muertos.
Oh, and that too. Yes. And we'll see if the world changes momentously tomorrow.
Yeah.
Actually, it's not going to change momentously either way, but it'll go in some positive direction or some negative direction.
Yeah, that it will. No standing still.
Yeah.
We have to practice surfing so that we maintain equilibrium as much as we can as we ride out these waves in the near future.
Are you a surfer?
No, I wish I was. I've tried. It's pretty hard.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
Right.
Okay.
Thank
Well,
you so
Claudine,
much.
thank you. All the best in everything you're working on. And we appreciate the great conversation.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Professor and the Idiot. If you like what you heard, go to Apple Podcasts and give us a good rating. Your positive feedback completes us.